You know, if you look at this vast world, there isn't a single nation or country that isn't in debt. Take the United States, for example, the economic powerhouse we constantly see on television and social media. It owes over $38 trillion, the highest debt in its entire history. The European Union carries about $14 trillion, while Japan holds nearly $9 trillion in debt. And it's not just them. Even Saudi Arabia, where oil flows endlessly, or China and Germany, where production never slows down, are drowning in debt. Right at this point, when you sit down and really think about it, a question pops up. Fine. If every single country on Earth owes this much money to someone, who exactly is the party on the receiving end? Don't let appearances fool you. In the world of finance, nothing is ever as simple as it looks from a distance. Debt isn't just a heavy burden to carry. It is actually a hidden harbor keeping the modern world afloat. The crises we experience, exploding economic indicators, and even wars are all shaped on top of this invisible scaffolding of IOUs. And if you dig deep enough to see where the tracks lead, you hit a very bizarre truth. The world doesn't actually owe money to a specific person or nation. The world, quite literally, owes it to itself. Of course, this circular reality doesn't mean everyone gets an equal slice of the pie. Right now, the entire planet is staring at a mountain of debt exceeding $315 trillion, nearly 3 times the size of the global economy. To understand how we ended up in this situation, let's rewind a bit. Long before credit cards and digital banking, this concept of national debt wasn't born in luxury high-rises. It was born right on the battlefield. The year is 1694. England is at war with France, but the gold in its treasury is running dry. In desperation, the king turns to wealthy merchants. He says, "Give me money now, and in return I will pay you continuous interest out of the taxes I'll collect in the future." To manage this exact system, the famous Bank of England is established. This was a revolutionary milestone in financial history. For the first time, a state gained the power to spend money it didn't have and hadn't yet earned. The merchants, on the other hand, received something priceless, the word of the state. In other words, the seeds of the government bonds we buy and sell today were planted that very day. The system worked so smoothly that France copied it, Holland took it to the next level, and even America adopted it to finance its own revolution. Being able to borrow was no longer a sign of failure, it was proof of how trustworthy you were. Essentially, the more you could borrow, the more powerful you became. Ancient empires used to conquer lands to find gold. In the modern world, they issue bonds to the market to collect interest. Battlefields have turned into corporate balance sheets. Today, global debt grows by a staggering $1 trillion every 100 days. Every country borrows, and every bank hands out credit. Whether we realize it or not, through the taxes we pay and the modest savings we keep in the bank, we are both the debtors and the creditors of this system. So, who do you think holds the other end of this rope? Let's start with the most striking one, America. Because its debt doesn't just affect its own citizens, it impacts all of us. About half of this $38 trillion belongs to public market investors. And here is the interesting part. 2/3 of those investors are American banks, pension funds, and its very own central bank, the Federal Reserve. This means debt to foreigners is only about 1/3 of the total. You've probably stumbled upon the myth that America owes everything to China, and China could ruin America at any moment. In reality, China's share is only about 2% of the total debt. Long story short, America's debt rolls right back to America. The Treasury issues bonds, banks buy them, and the Fed buys them back to pump liquidity into the market, printing new dollars in the process. The citizen pays taxes, those taxes turn into bond interest, and that interest goes right back into the citizen's retirement account. It's a perfect circular flow. The debt is very real, but when you look at the creditor, what you see is just a reflection of the system itself. Moreover, this game isn't just staged in America. The situation is identical worldwide. Japan lends to America, America funds Europe through the IMF, Europe opens credit lines to developing nations via the World Bank, and those nations turn around and invest their cash right back into Western bonds, sending the money back where it started. We are playing a massive planet-wide game of hot potato, with the only twist being that the potato is made of paper promises. Everyone at the table has borrowed chips from the person next to them, and the game has only one golden rule. Nobody, can leave the table. Naturally, this game has its ultimate rulers, the markets. Behind every bond sits an enormous web of central banks and hedge funds managing tens of trillions of dollars. These background structures decide who gets to borrow cheaply and who goes bankrupt. The moment they lose confidence, national currencies crash overnight and governments fall. Democracy might choose who governs a country, but the markets always decide who survives. At the very top of this hierarchy sit the central banks. They don't just manage debt, they literally create it out of thin air. Every time the Fed or the European Central Bank buys a bond, new money is manufactured on the spot. Every single dollar or cent in your pocket is actually a token representing a debt somewhere else. In other words, there's no such thing as debt-free money. Every bill has "this is a debt note" invisibly engraved on its surface. For years, this system has moved forward based on one single fuel: trust. As long as people believe that governments will keep paying their interest on time, even if they never pay back the actual principal, the wheel keeps turning. But what happens if that trust shatters? We witnessed this in Greece back in 2010. When the debts became unpayable, the entire order broke down, and a whole generation was sacrificed to harsh austerity measures. Argentina couldn't escape its debt trap, and in Sri Lanka, the money ran out so completely that citizens couldn't even buy fuel, causing the entire system to collapse. When the machinery breaks down, those invisible creditors in the back, the IMFs, the rating agencies, suddenly turn into monsters and show up at the door. But do you know what the most fascinating part is? Even after a total collapse, the system never actually changes. New debts simply replace the old ones. Names are shuffled around, but the fundamental structure remains exactly the same. That is because in the 21st century, debt is not meant to be paid back. It is designed to be rolled over, meaning postponed forever. Today, no government has any real intention of completely clearing its debt. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It is official state policy. When we borrow money individually, we are expected to return it down to the last penny. But states view debt as a never-ending monthly subscription. When the due date of an old debt arrives, they simply print new bonds, use that cash to cover the old one, and push the deadline down the road. Economists call this refinancing. Therefore, the actual product being sold here is interest, essentially the rental price of stability. The global economy is like a whale that must keep swimming to breathe. It relies entirely on creating an environment where this endless loop can continue, not on actual repayment. America's $38 trillion debt will never end. Japan lives with a debt load that is 2.5 times its national income, yet it still manages to keep its interest rates near zero. Investors aren't waiting around to get their principal back. They just want this lucrative deal to keep running. Why? Because government bonds are viewed as the safest investment on earth. Banks, pension funds, and central banks literally use these bonds just like cash. Just imagine if Washington suddenly had a wild idea and announced, "We are paying off all our debts today." What would happen? Every bank across the globe would lose its safest asset. The global supply of dollars would dry up instantly, and a catastrophic worldwide depression would trigger. In short, paying off the debt means destroying the very thing that makes the economy work. This is why governments do the exact opposite, continuously manufacturing flawless new layers of debt. Debt has become the actual lifestyle of capitalism. It is pumped into everything from your mortgage to your pension. When politicians step in front of the cameras and promise to balance the budget and pay off the national debt, they are simply telling you a comforting fairy tale. The goal is never to eliminate debt. It is to keep it sustainable, serviceable, and attractive enough so the system never stops believing in it. Because the moment that belief dies, the numbers lose all meaning, confidence vanishes, interest rates skyrocket, and everything grinds to a sudden halt. Here is the ultimate truth. The plan was never to pay back the debt. The plan was to make sure everyone keeps believing that it will be paid back. It is a massive, self-sustaining loop of trust. And as long as that trust continues, those numbers can expand forever. However, there's a minor injustice built into this. This trust is not distributed equally across society. When we say we owe it to ourselves, that's mostly a myth. The interest payments being made don't flow back fairly. They are taken out of the pockets of hard-working taxpayers and funneled straight up to massive institutions and wealthy investors. This means debt doesn't just separate countries, it separates classes. It is no coincidence that as global debt rises, the wealth gap between the rich and the poor widens. The system rewards those who hold the debt while punishing those who merely pay it off. Doesn't this story sound incredibly familiar? From a simple household budget all the way to global superpowers, the exact same gears are turning. The creditors are not evil villains, and the debtors are not helpless victims. They are both interlocking pieces of the same machine. The real problem arises when the gears jam, meaning when new debts can no longer keep up with the promises made in the past. When that day arrives, the question, who is the creditor, will stop being a theoretical debate and start hurting all of us personally. Because at the top of this pyramid, there isn't a specific group or person to blame. It isn't China, it isn't Wall Street, and it isn't the IMF. The truth is, it's both them and us. The modern world figured out how to turn debt itself into money. States print it, banks multiply it, and we have adapted to live completely dependent on it. At this stage, distinguishing the debtor from the creditor is virtually impossible. Debt used to mean bondage. Today it means the balance required to keep the wheels turning. But if this balance ever tips, if that confidence is shaken, we will remember what debt truly is in the most painful way possible. A massive promise that cannot be kept forever. If this story gave you a perspective you've never considered before, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't worry, history always holds the answers. I will simply show you where to look.